Diane Peterson's hand tore the diploma in half, with a sound that echoed through the entire mansion like a gunshot. Did you really think I would believe this lie? A cleaner with a PhD in biomedical engineering? Spare me that ridiculous lie. The expensive paper, with the golden seal of Johns Hopkins University, fell in pieces on the Italian marble floor as Grace Mitchell, 34, watched in silence, her hand still wet with soap and water, trembling slightly by her side. Diane had found the diploma inside Grace's bag, which was in the laundry room closet, forgotten there during her lunch break. The poisonous curiosity that always consumed her when it came to searching through her employees' things led her to open the worn leather case. What she saw instantly angered her. How could that black woman, who cleaned her bathrooms and washed her underwear for $8 an hour, have such a prestigious degree? It was impossible. It had to be fake. It had to be a pathetic attempt to seem more than she really was. Grace took a deep breath, counting mentally to 10 as she always did whenever Diane went beyond the limits of human decency. In the past 14 months, working in that 3-story mansion in Beverly Hills, she had learned that confronting Diane Peterson directly only made things worse. The woman was 42, with perfectly brushed platinum blonde hair, always perfect nails, and an ego the size of the Pacific Ocean. Her husband, Richard Peterson, was one of California's top real estate investors, which gave Diane the illusion that she herself was important, powerful, superior. Mrs. Peterson, that diploma is real. I graduated in 2015, got my master's and then my doctorate, Grace said calmly, her voice firm despite the storm of emotions she felt inside. She didn't want to talk about it. She never wanted to talk about it. But Diane had crossed a line that could not be ignored. Tearing up a diploma that represented years of sacrifice, sleepless nights, scholarships earned purely by merit, was an insult that cut deeper than any disguised racist comment Diane usually made during breakfast. Diane let out a piercing laugh that made the chandelier crystals above them vibrate. Real? You want me to believe that someone with a doctorate from Johns Hopkins is here, in my house, cleaning toilets and ironing my underwear? For goodness sake, Grace, I wasn't born yesterday. She threw the torn pieces of the diploma at Grace's face, the paper fragments floating in the air, before landing on the polished floor. How many of these fake things did you buy online? $100? $200? It must have been expensive for a liar like you. Grace bent down and began picking up the pieces of her diploma, each fragment representing a part of her story that Diane would never bother to know. The time in university when she worked 3 jobs at once to pay for housing. The early mornings in the library studying biomechanics and nanotechnology, while other students slept peacefully in their parent-funded dorms. Her doctoral thesis on the development of adaptive neural prosthetics, which had been cited in 17 international scientific publications. All of that reduced to pieces of paper on the floor by a woman who had never worked a single day in her life. I worked at Medtronic for 6 years after graduating, Grace said softly, still picking up the fragments. I developed 3 patents for medical devices that save lives to this day. But when my son was born with severe cerebral palsy, I needed a job with flexible hours to take care of him. Hospitals and labs demand 12-hour shifts, weekends, constant travel. I couldn't do that anymore. So I took cleaning jobs because they allow me to be home when Marcus needs me. Diane crossed her arms, her perfectly made-up face twisted in absolute scorn. What a convenient and dramatic story. The poor single mother who sacrificed everything for her sick child. You really practiced that story, didn't you? I bet you tell it to everyone you meet, hoping to get pity and maybe some extra cash. She walked closer to Grace, her $1,500 Louboutin heels clicking threateningly against the floor. But I know people like you, Grace. Always looking for a shortcut. Always trying to play the victim. Always lying to get what you want. You are not a doctor. You are a cleaner. And if I find out you're using fake diplomas to try to get better jobs using my house as a reference, I will make sure you never work in Beverly Hills again. The silence that followed was thick and heavy like concrete. Grace finished picking up the last pieces of the diploma and carefully put them in the pocket of the light blue uniform Diane made her wear. She would not argue anymore. She would not try to convince that woman of anything. Diane Peterson had spent her entire life surrounded by privileges she never had to earn, surrounded by people who agreed with her because they depended on her husband's money. surrounded by the illusion that her opinion mattered simply because she had a fat bank account and a closet the size of an apartment. "Now get out of my sight and finish cleaning the dining room before the guests arrive for dinner," Diane ordered, turning her back dramatically and walking towards the main staircase. "And Grace, if I catch you lying about qualifications you clearly don't have, you're fired. Immediately. No references. Understood?" Grace nodded silently and went to the dining room with her cleaning cart. Her hands still trembled slightly as she wiped down the antique mahogany dining table that seated 16 people. Diane was hosting a charity dinner that night, a grand event where rich women would pretend to care about needy children while drinking $300 champagne and showing off jewelry that cost more than most people earned in a whole year. As she polished the imported silverware to be used for dinner, Grace allowed herself a moment of memory. She remembered her graduation day at Johns Hopkins, when her advisor, Dr. Chen, had said she had one of the brightest minds she had seen in 30 years of academic career. She remembered the international conferences where she presented her research to audiences of hundreds of respected scientists. She remembered the feeling of achievement when the first prosthetic she helped develop allowed a 7-year-old child to walk again after a devastating accident. But then came Marcus, her beautiful, perfect son, who was born 3 months premature due to complications no doctor could foresee. The first few weeks in the neonatal ICU were a blur of terror and hope. When they finally brought Marcus home, doctors confirmed the diagnosis of severe cerebral palsy. He would need constant therapy, 24-hour care, specialized medical equipment, and extremely expensive medicines that insurance refused to cover completely. Marcus's father had disappeared before the baby was even 2 months old. He couldn't cope with the reality of a child with special needs. Grace was left alone, working 60 hours a week at Medtronic while leaving Marcus with nannies who charged fortunes. But she was never present. She missed his important developmental milestones, however small. She wasn't there when he first managed to hold his head up after months of therapy. She wasn't there when he truly smiled for the first time while listening to music. So she made the hardest decision of her life. She quit her dream job, left the career she had built with so much sweat and tears, and started taking cleaning jobs that offered full schedule flexibility. She could be present for Marcus. She could take him to therapy 3 times a week. She could take care of him when he had seizures in the middle of the night. She could simply be there, being the mother he needed, not just the absent provider. The sound of female voices echoing through the main entrance interrupted Grace's thoughts. Diane's guests were arriving for the charity event. Grace quickly finished arranging the silver cutlery in the exact order Diane had specified in one of her endless emails with detailed and absurd instructions. She could hear Diane greeting her friends with that artificial sweet voice she reserved for people in the same social circle. "My dear Amanda, you look absolutely stunning. Is that dress Valentino?" Diane chatted while Grace finished the final preparations in the dining room. The dinner menu had been planned by a private chef who charged $20,000 just for the consultation. Grace found it obscene to spend so much money on a single meal when there were people starving a few miles away, but she wasn't paid to have an opinion on the Petersons' extravagant spending. She was adjusting the last flower arrangement in the center of the table when Diane entered the room, accompanied by 3 impeccably dressed women, all smelling of expensive perfumes and superiority. "Grace, bring more champagne from the cellar, the 2006 Krug. And be quick, our guests are thirsty." Diane didn't even look at her when giving the order, already engrossed in a lively conversation about the new Hermes handbag collection. Grace went downstairs towards the climate-controlled wine cellar in the mansion's basement. The space was bigger than the 1-bedroom apartment where she lived with Marcus. Bottles of wine that cost thousands of dollars each were perfectly organized on mahogany shelves. She located the requested champagne, grabbed 3 bottles, as Diane always demanded even if there were only 8 guests, and began to walk back upstairs. When she entered the dining room carrying the bottles on a silver tray, she noticed that more women had arrived. All sat comfortably on the sofas in the adjacent living room, crystal glasses in hand, laughing at something one of them had just said. Grace began pouring the champagne silently, making herself almost invisible, as she had learned to do in these months working for the rich. "So I told her, dear, if you can't even keep your staff up to date with their vaccines, how do you expect me to let my son play at your house?" One of the women, dressed in a light pink Chanel suit, spoke loudly enough for the entire room to hear. These people simply don't understand basic hygiene standards. Grace poured the champagne into the woman's glass with a steady hand, her face keeping the neutral expression she had perfected. She knew exactly who those women were talking about when they used vague terms like, "these people." It was about her, about people like her. People who had to work 3 jobs to pay the bills. People who didn't have the luxury of worrying about which $50,000 car to buy for their 16-year-old child. "Diane, you're so lucky to have found this one," another woman commented, pointing at Grace with her chin. "My last cleaner stole a necklace I left on the dresser. I swear you can't trust anyone these days. I had to install cameras in every room of the house." Grace continued serving the champagne, moving from one woman to another with precise, professional movements. She didn't exist for them except as a function, a machine that cleaned, cooked, served. She had no history, no education, no dreams or pains. She was simply the cleaner. "Oh, but Grace is different," Diane said with a condescending smile that made Grace's stomach churn. "She at least knows her place, never causes trouble, never complains, does what I tell her without question. It's hard to find staff like that these days. Most want too many rights, you know how it is." The women laughed in agreement, shaking their perfectly styled heads in solidarity. Grace finished serving the champagne and began to move away quietly towards the kitchen when she heard Diane call her back. "Grace, before you go, tell my friends about that fake diploma you tried to fool me with today. They'll find it hilarious." The world seemed to stop for a moment. Grace slowly turned, facing Diane for the first time since the earlier incident. The other women watched with curiosity, already expecting an amusing story at the expense of the employee. Grace knew that anything she said would be twisted, mocked, turned into entertainment for those women who had never faced a single day of real hardship in their entire lives. "There's nothing to tell, Mrs. Peterson," Grace replied calmly, her voice low but clear. "It was just a misunderstanding." Diane laughed, that piercing laugh Grace had learned to deeply hate. "Misunderstanding? Darling, you tried to convince me you have a PhD from Johns Hopkins. Imagine, as if someone with that kind of education would be here, cleaning my toilets." She turned to her friends, her eyes shining with malice. She even had a fake diploma in her bag. Bought online for sure. I ripped that piece of junk in her face. The women laughed, some covering their mouths with their hands in fake shock, others shaking their heads in disapproval. Grace felt her cheeks burn, but she kept her composure. She had survived things much worse than public humiliation. She had survived entire nights in the hospital with Marcus struggling to breathe. She had survived medical bills that went past 6 figures. She had survived the abandonment by her child's father. She could survive this too. "Excuse me," she said softly, and began to walk towards the kitchen. But Diane was not finished yet. "Do you know what's saddest?" Diane continued, her voice following Grace down the hallway. "It's that they really believe these fantasies they create. They think if they pretend to be more than they are, they will somehow become important. It's truly pathetic." Grace entered the kitchen and closed the door behind her, leaning against the cold wall for a moment. Her hands trembled again, but this time it wasn't just anger or humiliation. It was something deeper. It was the accumulated tiredness from months of enduring Diane's veiled and not-so-veiled insults. It was the frustration of having to hide who she really was to keep a low-paying job that offered the flexibility Marcus needed. It was the pain of having sacrificed so much only to be treated as less than human by a woman who had never achieved anything on her own merit. The mansion's telephone rang, the sound echoing through the silent kitchen. Grace looked at the device on the wall, hesitating. It wasn't her job to answer phones. Diane had a personal secretary for that. But the persistent ringing began to annoy her, so she answered. "Peterson Residence," she said automatically, using the professional tone Diane insisted all staff use on the phone. "Yes, this is Dr. Elizabeth Chen from Cedars Sinai Hospital. I urgently need to speak with Mrs. Diane Peterson. It's about a medical emergency." The voice on the other end of the line was tense, filled with genuine urgency. Grace felt her heart race. Medical emergency. Richard Peterson was traveling for business in Europe. Would it be about him? "One moment, please. I'll call her immediately. Do you believe that people who humiliate others without knowing their stories deserve a second chance when the truth comes out? Or do you think some words and actions are unforgivable, regardless of the circumstances? Leave your opinion in the comments. I really want to know what you think about this." Grace walked quickly to the room where Diane was still entertained with her guests, all laughing at something that was likely just as cruel and shallow. "Mrs. Peterson, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's an urgent call from Cedars-Sinai Hospital. Dr. Chen said it's a medical emergency." Diane's face instantly went pale. All arrogance and amusement disappeared, replaced by pure terror. "Richard? Is it about Richard?" She stood up so quickly she almost knocked over her champagne glass, rushing towards the nearest phone in the room. Grace followed her, keeping a respectful distance as Diane grabbed the phone with trembling hands. "Hello? This is Diane Peterson. What happened? Is my husband okay?" Her voice was sharp, broken by fear. The other women in the room had fallen silent, watching the scene with genuine concern. As frivolous and cruel as they were in their daily talks, the possibility of death or serious illness still managed to break through their bubbles of privilege. Grace couldn't hear what the doctor was saying on the other end of the line, but she saw Diane's face go through multiple expressions in a matter of seconds. Confusion, relief, more confusion, and then something that looked like absolute disbelief. "But how? When did this happen?" "I don't understand, doctor." There was a long pause as Diane listened, her eyes slowly widening more and more. She slowly turned and looked directly at Grace with an expression that was impossible to fully decipher. There was confusion there, certainly, but also something that looked suspiciously like recognition beginning to emerge through the fog of her usual arrogance. "Yes, she's here. Grace Mitchell, my cleaner." Another pause. "What? No, there must be a mistake. She's just—" Diane stopped speaking abruptly, the color completely draining from her face as the doctor apparently cut her off with information that clearly shocked her. "I see. Yes, I understand. She was working here when it happened? My God." Diane's friends began to whisper among themselves, trying to figure out what was happening. Grace remained where she was, completely lost as to why her name had come up in a conversation about a medical emergency involving the Petersons. She barely knew Richard Peterson. The man was rarely home, and when he was, he practically didn't acknowledge the existence of the staff. "Please, put her on the phone," Diane finally said, her voice strangely soft now. She extended the phone to Grace with a visibly trembling hand. "Dr. Chen wants to speak with you." Grace took the phone hesitantly, absolute confusion written on her face. "Hello? Dr. Mitchell, this is Elizabeth Chen. We worked together briefly at a bioengineering conference in 2013. You presented that groundbreaking work on adaptive neural prosthetics that we still cite regularly." The doctor's voice was warm, respectful, completely different from any tone Grace was used to hearing directed at her lately. The world seemed to disappear beneath Grace's feet. Someone who knew her work, someone who called her Dr. Mitchell, someone who remembered her research. "Yes, I remember you, Dr. Chen, but I don't understand why you're calling me here. Dr. Mitchell, we have an extremely delicate situation. A 9-year-old child was admitted to the hospital 3 hours ago after a severe car accident. She has spinal cord injuries that, frankly, are beyond the ability of our current team. We need someone specialized in neural interfaces to coordinate the surgery that can save her ability to walk again." Dr. Chen paused. "The child's father is your employer, Richard Peterson. He is being emergency transported from London now, but the window for surgical intervention is only 6 hours. Without someone with your specific expertise, the girl will be permanently paralyzed." Grace felt as if she had been hit by lightning. Richard Peterson's daughter. She didn't even know the Petersons had children. In 14 months working in that house, no one had ever mentioned a child. "I don't understand. Why don't you call someone from UCLA's neurosurgery program or even Stanford? We've already tried. All suitable specialists are at conferences, scheduled surgeries that cannot be canceled, or physically too far away to arrive in time. Dr. Mitchell, I know you left the medical field. It's no secret in academic circles that you made immense sacrifices to care for your son." Dr. Chen's voice was gentle, but urgent. "But you were listed as a secondary emergency contact years ago when you worked at Medtronic. Your colleagues still talk about you as one of the brightest minds in bioengineering they've ever known. And now, by pure chance, you are working in the home of the only child in this city who needs precisely your extremely specific area of expertise, and we need it within hours, not days." Grace looked at Diane, who was completely pale, gripping the back of a chair as if she would faint at any moment. The other women in the room watched in absolute silence, clearly confused, but sensing that something monumentally important was unfolding before them. "The child," Grace said slowly. "What's her name?" "Sophia Peterson, 9 years old. She was coming back from ballet when the accident happened." Dr. Chen paused. "Dr. Mitchell, I understand if you cannot do this. I know what I'm asking, but this child has exactly the type of injury that your doctoral research focused on treating. You literally wrote the manual on this specific procedure." Grace closed her eyes for a moment, her brain processing information at maximum speed. Sophia Peterson, 9 years old. She had just found out that Diane and Richard had a daughter she had never seen or heard mentioned in over a year working there. And now this child was fighting for the ability to walk, for the ability to have a normal life. And Grace was apparently one of the few people on the planet with the specific knowledge needed to help her. "Where is she studying?" Grace suddenly asked, a horrible suspicion forming in her mind. "Westbrook Academy. It's a boarding school for girls in the northern part of the state," Dr. Chen replied. "Why?" Everything suddenly made sense. Diane and Richard had sent their daughter to a boarding school. She was barely home. She probably spent holidays with relatives or at summer camps. That was why Grace had never seen any sign of a child in the mansion. No toys, no recent photos, no room clearly belonging to a 9-year-old girl. The Petersons had essentially outsourced the raising of their own daughter so they could maintain their extravagant social lives and selfish routines without interruption. "I'll do it," Grace finally said. "Send a car to pick me up here at the Peterson mansion. I just need to make a quick call to arrange care for my son, and then I'll be on my way. Thank you, Dr. Mitchell. Truly, thank you. I'm sending the car now. It will arrive in 10 minutes. The relief in Dr. Chen's voice was clear. Grace hung up the phone and turned to find Diane looking at her as if she had never seen her before, which, in many ways, was true. Diane had looked through Grace for 14 months, seeing only a convenient cleaner, never the complex, highly qualified person who existed beyond that superficial label. "You," Diane began, her voice strangely hoarse. "Do you really have a PhD? Did you really work developing medical devices?" Grace didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled her cell phone from her pocket and quickly dialed the number of her neighbor, who often watched Marcus in emergencies. "Mrs. Rodriguez, it's Grace. I have a medical emergency at the hospital. Can you stay with Marcus for a few hours?" "Great. Thank you. I'll pay double the normal rate. I'll be home in 5 minutes to grab some things." Only after hanging up did Grace finally look directly at Diane, her gaze calm but filled with 14 months of unexpressed humiliations. "Yes, Mrs. Peterson, I really do have a PhD. I have 3 patents in my name. I was named one of the 20 most promising bioengineers under 30 by the American Medical Association. And that diploma you tore up earlier today? It was completely genuine." Block 4. The silence in the room was so thick that Grace could hear the ticking of the antique clock in the hallway. Diane's friends were open-mouthed, looking back and forth between the hostess and the cleaner, who apparently wasn't just a cleaner. Diane seemed to have turned into a statue, unable to fully process the size of the situation. "But why?" Diane finally managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. "Why are you working as a cleaner if you are all of that?" Grace picked up her bag and started walking towards the door. She didn't owe Diane any explanations, not after months of demeaning treatment, not after having her diploma torn up that very afternoon. But maybe, just maybe, there was a lesson that needed to be taught here. A lesson about judgment, about privilege, about human worth that exists regardless of one's job. "Because my son, Marcus, has severe cerebral palsy," Grace said, turning to face Diane one last time before leaving. "He needs constant care, therapy multiple times a week, attention I couldn't give if I were working 60 hours a week in a lab. So I chose cleaning jobs because they offer flexible hours. I can be present for my son. I can take him to doctors. I can simply be the mother he needs." "You sacrificed your entire career," one of Diane's friends murmured, seeming genuinely moved for the first time that evening. "I sacrificed nothing," Grace corrected firmly. "I made a choice. I chose my son over professional titles and academic recognition. But that didn't make me less smart, less capable, or less worthy of basic respect, something Mrs. Peterson clearly never understood. The sound of a horn outside signaled that the hospital car had arrived. Grace adjusted her bag on her shoulder and started to walk, but Diane suddenly grabbed her arm, in the exact same spot where she had gripped it earlier, with force and anger. This time, the touch was hesitant, almost pleading. "Please," Diane said, tears starting to form in her perfectly made-up eyes. "Please, save my daughter. I know I don't deserve to ask for anything after how I treated you, but please." Grace looked at Diane's hand on her arm, and then at the face of the woman who had repeatedly humiliated her for over a year. There was something devastating about seeing Diane Peterson, always so arrogant and cruel, completely broken by the fear of losing her daughter. Grace could feel anger, could hold a grudge, could simply turn her back and let Diane sink into her own despair. But then she thought of Sophia, a 9-year-old girl who was not at fault for her parents' character flaws, a child who deserved the chance to walk again, to dance, to live fully. "I will do everything in my power to help Sophia," Grace said calmly, removing her arm from Diane's grip. "But not for you, for her, because no child deserves to suffer because of the mistakes of the adults around them." She paused, her eyes meeting Diane's with an intensity that made the woman pull back slightly. "And when this is over, when your daughter is safe and recovering, I will leave this house and you will never see me again. Not because I don't need the job, but because no one, absolutely no one, deserves to be treated the way you treated me." Grace left, without looking back, leaving Diane alone with her friends in an awkward silence that no amount of expensive champagne could break. She got into the car that was waiting for her, a black SUV with the Cedars-Sinai Hospital logo subtly displayed on the side. The driver immediately sped towards her apartment so she could grab some belongings and check on Marcus before heading to the hospital. During the 15-minute drive to her apartment in the less privileged part of the city, Grace closed her eyes and allowed her mind to switch from humiliation mode to surgeon mode. She hadn't operated or even consulted on a surgical case for almost 4 years, since Marcus was born. But the knowledge was still there, deeply etched in her memory through years of intense study and practice. Spinal cord injuries, neural interfaces, adaptive prosthetics. All of this was familiar territory, even if long abandoned. When the car stopped in front of her modest building, Grace quickly climbed the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment. Mrs. Rodriguez was already there, having used the extra key Grace had given her for emergencies. Marcus was in the living room, lying on his special therapy mat, watching cartoons with that beautiful smile that always made Grace's heart melt, no matter how tough the day had been. "Mommy," Marcus managed to say with effort, his words always a little slurred but full of genuine love. At 4 years old, he was making progress that doctors had said was unlikely. Grace believed it was because he felt the constant love, the dedicated presence, the attention she had chosen to prioritize above all else. "Hi, my love." Grace knelt beside him, kissing his forehead. "Mommy needs to go help someone at the hospital, but Mrs. Rodriguez will stay here with you, okay? I'll be back as soon as possible." Marcus nodded, his eyes wide and trusting. He never questioned when his mother needed to leave. There was an understanding between them that went beyond words, a deep connection forged through countless difficult nights and challenging mornings. Grace quickly went into her room, grabbed a change of clean clothes and some important documents she had kept, including certified copies of her diplomas and medical certifications. She wasn't going to let anyone question her credentials again. 20 minutes later, she was walking through the automatic doors of Cedars-Sinai emergency room. A medical team was waiting for her at the entrance, led by a middle-aged Asian woman whom Grace immediately recognized as Dr. Elizabeth Chen. They had indeed met at that conference years ago, though Grace doubted the doctor truly remembered her among hundreds of other presenters. "Dr. Mitchell, thank you for coming so quickly." Dr. Chen extended her hand, her handshake firm and respectful. "I know you've been out of clinical practice for a few years, but frankly, you are our best hope right now. Let me take you to see the scans and assess the situation." As they walked quickly through the hallways, Dr. Chen explained the technical details of the case. Sophia Peterson had been hit from the side by a driver who ran a red light at high speed. The impact caused multiple spinal fractures, but the most critical damage was a partial laceration of the spinal cord in the thoracic region. It was the exact type of injury that Grace's doctoral research had focused on treating through neural interfaces that could bridge damaged areas, allowing nerve signals to continue flowing. The problem, Dr. Chen continued as they entered the examination room where monitors displayed multiple MRI images, is that we have an extremely limited window before swelling and tissue death make any intervention useless. We need to act within the next 4 hours, or Sophia will permanently lose the function of her legs. Grace approached the monitors, her trained eyes immediately spotting the critical areas of concern. It was like coming home after a long absence. Everything still made sense. All the patterns she had spent years learning to interpret were still crystal clear. Do you have the neural interface devices in stock? The Medtronic 723 model or anything from the 800 series? We have the 812, Dr. Chen confirmed. It's experimental, not yet fully approved by the FDA for regular pediatric use, but we got emergency authorization given the circumstances. Grace nodded, already mentally outlining the surgical plan. I'll need a full neurosurgery team, someone specialized in spinal orthopedics, an anesthesiologist experienced in complex pediatric cases, and at least 2 technicians familiar with neural interface technology. She turned to face Dr. Chen directly. And I need full authority to make all surgical decisions without consulting committees or waiting for approvals. We don't have time for red tape. You have complete carte blanche, Dr. Chen assured. The hospital board has already approved it. Richard Peterson gave consent by phone from London. You are in absolute command of this operation. Over the next 40 minutes, Grace completely transformed. The humiliated cleaner vanished, replaced by the brilliant surgeon who had once been considered one of medical bioengineering's greatest promises. She reviewed every detail of the scans, checked the equipment personally, briefed the surgical team on the complex procedure they were about to perform, and mentally prepared for a surgery that would likely last 5 to 6 hours. When they finally entered the operating room, Grace looked at the unconscious girl on the table. Sophia Peterson had light brown hair like her mother, but her face held a sweetness Diane had never possessed. She was wearing a blood-stained light pink ballet tutu, her shoes still tied on her small feet. A child. Just a child who wanted to dance and had been a victim of a careless driver's neglect. We're going to save her, Grace said to the team around her, her voice firm and confident. We're going to give this girl the chance to dance again. We're going to show her that there are still people in this world who care, who will fight for her even when the odds seem impossible. The surgery began at 8:15 in the evening. Grace worked with a precision that surprised even the most experienced surgeons in the room. Her hands, which had spent the last months cleaning floors and polishing silver, now handled microsurgical instruments with extraordinary skill. Every movement was calculated, every decision made with deep knowledge built through years of intense study and practice. At 2 in the morning, when Grace finally made the last suture and stepped back from the operating table, the entire team burst into silent applause. She had done it. Against significant odds, with experimental equipment, after years away from surgical practice, she had performed an operation that very few people in the entire world would be capable of executing. The neural interfaces were perfectly positioned, creating bridges over the damaged areas of the spinal cord. If everything went as planned, Sophia Peterson would not only walk again, but would have an almost complete recovery. Grace left the operating room completely exhausted, her body painfully reminding her that she had spent an entire day cleaning a huge mansion before performing a complex 6-hour surgery. But there was a deep satisfaction pulsing through the tiredness. She had saved a life. She had used her talents, her carefully nurtured skills, to give a child the chance of a full future. In the waiting room, Diane Peterson sat alone, still wearing the designer dress she had put on for the charity dinner that clearly never happened. Her face was stained with smeared mascara, her perfectly styled hair now messy, her entire facade of superiority completely broken down. When she saw Grace appear, she stood up so quickly that she tripped over her own feet. "How is she? Is Sophia going to be okay? Please tell me my daughter is going to be okay." Diane ran to Grace, her hands clutching the surgeon's arms with genuine desperation. "The surgery was successful," Grace said calmly, gently removing Diane's hands. "The neural interfaces are installed and working properly. Sophia will need intensive physical therapy for the next 6 to 12 months, but the prognosis is extremely positive. She should regain about 95% of her leg function. Diane collapsed right there, her knees giving way as violent sobs shook her entire body. Thank you. My God, thank you. I don't know what to say. How can I thank you? Grace looked at that broken woman on the waiting room floor and felt a complex mix of emotions. Part of her wanted to feel satisfied seeing Diane so broken, so humble, so completely stripped of the arrogance that defined her. But mostly, she just felt tired and a deep sadness for how much suffering could have been avoided if people simply treated each other with basic respect from the start. You can start by treating people with dignity, regardless of the job they do, Grace said softly. You can start by recognizing that human worth is not measured by a bank account or social status. You can start by seeing the people around you as complete human beings, with stories and struggles and talents you never imagined. Diane nodded wildly, tears still streaming down her face. I will. I swear I will. I'll be better. I'll change. Please forgive me, please. But Grace was already walking away, heading towards the hospital exit. Forgiveness wasn't something Diane could simply receive because she asked nicely. It was something that needed to be earned through genuine change in behavior, through consistent actions over time, not through desperate promises made in a moment of crisis. When Grace arrived at the reception, she found Dr. Chen waiting for her with an expression that mixed admiration and something more. Dr. Mitchell, what you did there was absolutely extraordinary. The precision, the speed, the flawless clinical judgment. You are even better than the legends we heard about you in medical circles. Thank you, Dr. Chen, Grace replied sincerely. But now I need to go home. My son is waiting. Before you go, Doctor. Chen gently held her arm. I want to make a proposal. I know you left medical practice for completely understandable and admirable reasons. But what if we could create a position that would suit your needs as a mother? Bioengineering consulting, special cases only, completely flexible hours, remote work when possible. The hospital would lose a fortune keeping you on retainer, but what you did today is priceless. Grace hesitated, the offer tempting but complicated. I need to think about it. I need to consider what's best for Marcus first. Of course, completely understandable. Dr. Chen handed her a card. My personal number is on it. Call when you want to talk. And Dr. Mitchell, thank you. Truly. You saved not only a child's life, but the quality of that life. That is a gift beyond price. The sun was starting to rise when Grace finally arrived home. Mrs. Rodriguez had fallen asleep on the sofa, and Marcus was sleeping peacefully in his room. Grace paid the neighbor generously, thanked her profusely, and then simply stood in Marcus's room for long minutes, watching her son's chest rise and fall with each breath. She had made the right choice 4 years ago when she left her career to be present for him. She didn't regret it for a second. But maybe, just maybe, there was a way to balance both worlds, to use her exceptional talents to help others while still prioritizing the son who needed her. The following days brought changes Grace could never have predicted. The story of the miracle surgery leaked to the press, and suddenly she was being called a hero by local media. Reporters wanted interviews. Other hospitals started calling with offers. Universities showed interest in having her as a speaker or visiting professor. Even more surprising was when Richard Peterson finally returned from London and appeared at Grace's apartment door 3 days after the surgery. The man seemed to have aged 10 years in a week. When Grace opened the door, he just stood there, looking completely lost. Dr. Mitchell, I don't even know where to begin to thank you, he said, his voice hoarse. My daughter is awake. She wiggled her toes this morning. The doctors say it's an extremely positive sign. You gave my daughter back to me. How is Sophia? Grace asked, ignoring his attempts at gratitude. She hadn't done it for recognition or rewards. Scared, in pain, but incredibly brave, Richard replied. She keeps asking when she can dance again. I told her the extraordinary doctor who operated on her believes she will dance better than ever. There was an awkward silence. Richard clearly wanted to say more, but seemed to be struggling to find the words. Finally, he spoke. Diane told me everything. About how she treated you. About the diploma she tore. About the months of humiliations. Dr. Mitchell, I have no words to express my shame and horror. Then don't try, Grace said simply. Just make sure your wife learns something from this. And maybe consider spending more time with your daughter instead of sending her to boarding schools where you barely have to think about her. Richard flinched as if physically hit, but nodded. You are absolutely right. Sophia is coming home. We will hire private tutors, therapists, everything she needs. But she will be with us, where she always should have been. Well, Grace said, starting to close the door. That's a start. Wait. Richard took an envelope from the inner pocket of his blazer. Please accept this. Not as payment because no amount of money could make up for what you did, but as a recognition, as an attempt to make up, however poorly, for the months you spent being treated poorly in my home. Grace looked at the envelope but didn't take it. Mr. Peterson, I don't want your money. I want you and your wife to become better people. I want you to treat all human beings with basic dignity. I want you to look at someone in a service position and see a whole person, with dreams and struggles and hidden talents. I want you to never again judge someone's worth based on skin color or profession. That is the only payment that matters to me. But Richard insisted, placing the envelope on the hallway table next to the door. Please, at least look. It's not just money. There are legal documents too. After he left, Grace picked up the envelope with curiosity. Inside was a check for $500,000 and documents establishing a full educational fund for Marcus, covering all his medical needs, therapies, and future education up to university. There was also a handwritten letter from Diane with pages and pages of detailed apologies, recognition of awful behavior, and promises of genuine change. Grace read the letter once and then put it aside. Words were easy. Actions would be the real test. 3 months later, Grace accepted the consultant position at Cedars-Sinai on her own terms. She worked remotely most of the time, appearing at the hospital only for especially complex cases that required her unique expertise. The pay was excellent, and most importantly, she could still be present for Marcus at all critical moments. Sophia Peterson made remarkable progress in her recovery. 6 months after the surgery, she was walking with just a light cane. 9 months later, she returned to ballet classes. A year later, she was dancing in a recital where Grace was a guest of honor, watching with tears in her eyes as the girl she had saved performed graceful pirouettes on stage. Diane was in the audience too, but completely changed. She had started volunteering at women's shelters, was doing therapy to confront her own privileges and biases, and according to what Grace heard from reliable sources, had fired her toxic friends and found a much more compassionate and aware social circle. But the most satisfying moment for Grace came when she was invited to give a lecture at Stanford University on medical bioengineering and ethics. The auditorium was completely packed with students of medicine, engineering, and medical ethics. When she stepped onto the stage, there was a standing ovation even before she began to speak. 4 years ago, Grace began, her calm but powerful voice echoing through the silent auditorium. I made a choice that many people in the medical field considered a waste. I left a promising career, abandoned groundbreaking research, and took minimum wage cleaning jobs. And you know what? I don't regret it for a second. She paused, letting the words sink in. Because I learned something no classroom could ever teach me. I learned that human worth isn't in titles, publications, or professional recognition. It's in how we treat each other. It's in being present for those who need us. It's in sacrificing what the world deems important to prioritize what truly matters. The students listened with deep respect. Grace told the whole story. The humiliation at Diane's hands, the torn diploma, the life-saving surgery, everything. She was brutally honest about the pain of prejudice, about the emotional cost of being constantly underestimated, but also about the power of maintaining dignity and purpose, even when the world insists on belittling you. The most important lesson I can share with you today, she concluded, is to never, absolutely never, judge a person's worth by the position they hold in society. The person cleaning the hospital bathrooms might have a PhD. The waitress serving your coffee might speak 6 languages. The bus driver might be a brilliant poet. Treat every human being as if they are extraordinary because often they are. The standing ovation that followed lasted almost 10 minutes. Students lined up afterward to talk with her, many with tears in their eyes. sharing their own stories of being underestimated, of sacrificing careers for family, of choosing compassion over ambition. And there, at the back of the auditorium, Grace saw Diane Peterson sitting quietly. She hadn't announced her presence, hadn't tried to draw attention to herself. She was simply there, listening, learning, trying to understand the size of the harm she had caused, and how she could spend the rest of her life making amends not just with Grace, but with all the people she had looked through without truly seeing. When the crowd finally dispersed, Diane approached shyly. "Dr. Mitchell, thank you for sharing your story. I know it included painful parts about me. You had every right. I didn't share it to specifically shame you," Grace said honestly. "I shared it because it's a lesson everyone needs to learn. And Diane, I've heard about your volunteer work, about the changes you've been making. That's real. That matters. Keep doing it." Diane nodded, tears silently streaming down her face. "I will continue, every day, for the rest of my life." "And Dr. Mitchell? Sophia asks about you constantly. She says when she grows up, she wants to be exactly like you." Grace smiled, the first time she had genuinely smiled at Diane. "Bring her to visit Marcus sometime. I think they'd get along." As Grace drove home that night, Marcus safely strapped into his special seat in the back. She thought about the extraordinary journey of the past few years. She had lost a career, but gained something much more valuable, a deep understanding of what truly matters, the power of quiet strength, the strength that comes from choosing dignity even when the world offers you humiliation. And maybe, just maybe, she had planted seeds of change that would grow far beyond herself. Students who heard her story would treat janitors and cleaners with respect. Diane would become better and influence others. Sophia would grow up knowing that true nobility does not come from privilege but from character. "Mommy," Marcus called from the back seat, his voice clearer than ever after months of dedicated therapy. "You are my hero." Grace felt warm tears stream down her face, but they were tears of pure joy. "No, my love, you are mine. You always have been." And in that moment, driving through the city's lit streets towards the small apartment they called home, Grace Mitchell knew with absolute certainty that she had made all the right choices. Not the easy path, not the path others would approve of, but the right path for her and her son. And in the end, that was all that truly mattered. If this story touched something inside you, if you know someone who has been underestimated, or you yourself have gone through this, leave your comment sharing your experience. I'd love to create more stories like this, so suggest themes and situations you'd like to see explored. Every comment, every shared story, every suggestion helps create content that truly resonates and perhaps, who knows, inspires someone who needs to hear that their worth is not measured by what others think of them. Thank you for being here, for dedicating your time to this journey. Subscribe so you don't miss the next stories, because I have many others to share about extraordinary people the world tried to make invisible. Until next time.